Recording? We're good? Let's go. So how to know when to refinance, guys. My name's Mark, I'm an entrepreneur and property investor, and in today's video I'm going to give you some really interesting formulas that you're going to be able to action, which will be able to tell you how to know when to refinance and when to make sure you're not making a mistake in refinancing. Because this came up in conversation, it was my wife's birthday yesterday, and we talked about one of the refinances that she's recently done, where I said, actually, mathematically, that's a mistake, we shouldn't have done that. And I'll tell you why in a minute, and we'll go through it all, and I will give you all the formulas and the thought processes that go through my mind when I come up with these decisions. So guys, if you haven't already given this video a like, please give it a big like, it helps me out with the algorithm. And if you haven't already subscribed, why not consider subscribing? Remember, we don't sell any course, which means we don't hold back any information. Ultimately, we give everything out for free, and all we ask for is a like and a subscribe. So if you could do that, that'd be fantastic. Guys, let's get into it and let's talk about how to know when to refinance and what sort of mathematical equations you can use to make sure that you're making the right decisions. Now, first of all, what is a refinance? So a refinance is where you've got an investment property, you already own it, it's already got a mortgage on it, or maybe it hasn't, no, it has to have a mortgage on it, it's a refinance. Otherwise, it'd just be the first time of financing. But ultimately, you own this property and you're going to be getting a new mortgage, normally a new valuation. So let's say, for example, we've got a £100,000 house, it's now 10 years later worth £200,000, and we've got £100,000 of equity in there. Well, you can draw down 75% of this new value, and that would be your refinance figure. So in this example, it might be that you had an existing mortgage of £75,000. Your new mortgage could be £150,000. So 150k minus the 75k would give you a 75k refi. And that would be the amount that you'd be able to get out of the property minus fees and all the usual expenses such as solicitors. So it's 75 grand cash to be able to then reinvest and do other things with. So the question in this video is, how would you know that it's a good idea to take the money out of that? Because a lot of people say, obviously you'll never own the property fully if you're not paying down the mortgage and you're refinancing and you're taking on all this extra risk. And I think, first of all, the real important thing to say is you always own all the property. You also always own all the debt, right? These two things are not mutually exclusive. Like if, for example, the property went down in value, the debt doesn't go down in value. If the property goes up in value, the debt doesn't go up in value. You owe all the money, it's just secured against a property. Okay, so it's important to say you always own all the house and you always owe all the debt. And at the moment, you can currently refinance until you're 106 years old. So if your strategy, like me, is to die with your property portfolio, and I've currently got about £3 million worth of property, I intend on buying more, I intend on extending that, I currently run it about 60% LTV, and over time I'm sure that will reduce because my risk profile reduces, but ultimately I intend on growing that by borrowing more money and putting it into more properties. But ultimately I know that at the moment I can refinance up until I'm 106 years old, and if I'm lucky enough to make it that long, I'm sure I won't care about the end result. So guys, at a younger age, like let's switch back to now. I mean, I'm 39 years old. What do we want to look at when we're making these decisions? Now, the first number you need is the interest rate. Now, the interest rate is really key. And at the moment, if you're doing a buy-to-let in your personal name, you're going to get about 1.5% on a 2-year fixed. That's phenomenal. If you're doing in a limited company, you're going to get around about 3%. There's plenty of just sub 3% mortgages for a buy-to-let, but I just want to give you the figures there or thereabouts, So 1.5 to 3%. Now, the next question you need is, what would you do with that money? So this is what we call the opportunity cost. It's what would we do with the money? So if we were to take that money out, how much could we make on it? And when we buy single lets, what we aim to do is between 8 and 12%. So if that number is greater than the interest rate that we're borrowing at, I would suggest it's a good investment. If that number was the same or less than the interest rate we were borrowing at, I would say it's a bad investment, because ultimately it also carries risk. And that's the next thing on my list, is risk. And this is unquantifiable, because this really is a case of, what is the market looking like? What are your expectations for the future? What's going on in the world around you? There's lots lots and lots of things that come into risk. But there is another thing that we can put in that we know will impact the amount, and this is fees. So we know if we're doing solicitor's fees, we're going to spend about £1,000 on a refinance, maybe slightly more. We're going to have valuation fees of 500. We're going to have mortgage product fees of about 1,000. You know, these are all going to add up. Maybe you've got a broker fee of 500. So suddenly we've got 3k of fees before we even start. And this can easily be between 3 and 5k over here, in my experience. 3 to 5k for a refinance. And the reason and the motivation for this video is my wife and I were talking about one of our properties where she did do a refinance. We bought the property for 100,000. She refinanced it at 110,000, which means she got £7,500 back, but the fees were 3,500 to do that. And I said, mathematically, it doesn't make any sense. We shouldn't have done that. We should have left that money alone, because we paid we paid about half of it in fees. It's a ridiculous amount. We should have just rolled it over, and you can just get a new product with your existing lender, and the fees are far smaller. You're still going to pay the arrangement fee. You're not going to pay a broker fee. Generally speaking, we don't pay a valuation fee. They don't need to send a new valuer out. And generally speaking, we're not going to be paying a solicitor's fee. So all in all, just rolling over onto a new deal can cost as little as £1,000 rather than paying £3,000 or £4,000 or £5,000. And it's also possible that the experience that I've got where we have done this and we didn't pay any of those fees isn't normal. I mean, I don't know that for a fact. We do a lot of refinancing. So it's important to say that when I've rolled one over before, it's because there just wasn't that much money in the deal, right? Like I think we bought it for $350, and at the time it came round, it was worth like $365. There was only 15k in it, and we were only able to get 75% of that anyway. There just wasn't any money in it once the fees and everything came out, and we just rolled it over with the existing lender. It was absolutely fine. But for me, the fees are really a big drag on your wealth creation. So in this example, where my wife got 7,500 but paid 3,500, well, we only ended up with 4,000 in that example, didn't we? And we went through all that hassle, all that admin for a very small amount of money, and we lined the pockets of everybody else, really. We didn't line our own pockets. Conversely, there have been ones where we, for example, bought a property for 400,000, it was revalued at 550. I mean, you can see that if you're going to be borrowing £100,000 to pay a couple of grand in fees isn't a big deal. But if you're borrowing 7,500 to pay a couple of grand in fees, it's a huge deal. So I think fees are quite often completely underspoken about on YouTube. I think more people in this industry should be talking about fees and how the fees can erode your wealth creation. And I think the reason it's not talked about is because it makes deals look worse. And it makes deals look worse, which then means the dream isn't quite so good. And for me, I like to be really real on this channel. I want to make sure that I'm completely transparent, and for me, fees really do drag on wealth creation. But I don't want to just get carried away with just one point. I want to go back to the interest rate versus opportunity cost. So let's assume the previous example of £100,000, we've got this 75 grand we can get out. With 75k, you could probably do a fairly hefty buy, refurbish, refinance project. You could probably do a fairly hefty single let, you could do a decent HMO conversion. You know, you've probably got a good opportunity cost somewhere. Single let 8 to 12%, you could do a HMO at 15 to 20%, fairly comfortably, somewhere in that region. Your buy, refurbish, refinance, in my experience, all money out just really doesn't exist that often, if at all. In my experience, I haven't managed it. I've done 13 projects. I've been involved in about 50. We are either not very good at it, which I wouldn't say is the case, or we just haven't come across the examples of where you could get all your money out, or we haven't dressed the figures up. But ultimately, you know, if you can get half your money back, that's pretty good in my experience, but you are taking on more risk, and I think it's really important you say that. I have seen examples of where people have bought, renovated, and then not got the end value, and the risk platform has come in and they've actually lost money. So please don't think that this is a one-way street. It's not. As soon as you start doing things that are more complicated, it comes with more risk. The same as with a HMO, right? It comes with more risk. The returns are better potentially, but it comes with more risk. Single let, the returns are less, but it comes with less risk. But even at one of those, if you can borrow at 1.5% or 3%, and you're only going to pay a couple of grand of fees on this 75k in this fictional purpose, I would say that it's got a fantastic opportunity cost, and the refinance in that example would be a great idea. So hopefully this video has given you an idea of when it's a good idea to refinance, as well as what refinancing is and the sort of nuances that go through my mind when I'm deciding whether or not to refinance. For me, I think the key things are fees, risk, interest rates, and opportunity cost. And I think as long as you write all of those down, understand what it means to you, and then do your own calculations, you're going to be in a great position to decide whether you should refinance your asset or not. So guys, if you like this video, if you haven't already given it a like, please do. As I said, it's the only thing we want on this channel. And if you haven't already subscribed, consider subscribing, and I will see you next time. Cheers guys, bye-bye. Boom.